Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the E-commerce Edge podcast. It is great to have you along for the ride with us today. Now, before I introduce my incredible next guest, have a fantastic conversation about his technology and what it does for the e-commerce and digital industries, I'd like to encourage you to go to your platform of choice where you get your podcasts or your videos, hit that like button, hit that share button, and of course, drop us a comment if you wish. And there's a new feature within Spotify where you can actually leave comments on podcast episodes directly within the Spotify app. So we'd love to hear from you. It helps us with the algo rankings. And of course, we're all slaves to the algo to a degree. So thank you very much for spending your time with us today and helping us out in that front. Now, without further ado, I would love to welcome Rich Kahn from Anura to the podcast. Welcome, Rich.
Hey, thanks for having me today.
You're dialing in from the great state of Delaware, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
And we were talking, you said you're originally from New York,
Yep.
and we were talking, you're coming into winter now, but you said Delaware is a heck of a lot more temperate and easygoing from a climate perspective than New York was.
I love it. Like I was originally born in the Bronx, moved up to upstate, which for us was Rockland County. That was one county outside of New York. And yeah, we used to get some winters were feet of snow, and I can do without snow. So when we
Yeah.
decided to move, we were looking a little further south. We fell in love with Delaware for a lot of reasons. And one of the biggest reasons was, and I have a quick story on this because I like stories. My daughter had to be rushed to the hospital. Thankfully, it was nothing serious, but we had just gotten a 1.5 foot traditional dumped on us, and we had, I want to say, like a 50-foot driveway at the time, and a minivan. So my wife and I had to dug trenches just to get the car out so we can get her onto Main Road and get her to the hospital. And we were going feverishly quick because we wanted, obviously, our daughter needed attention. And as we're doing it, I told my wife, call the real estate agent in Delaware and find out how much snow they got today. So she calls up after everything was fine and everything was good, and calls up and she's like, "Oh yeah," the real estate agent says, "Yeah, we got a dusting. It was gone by lunch." I'm like, "Done." For
You're like,
sale.
that's the place for us. You said, I can live with the dusting.
Yeah,
That's for sure.
that's the way to go.
Love it. And by last count, I count 8 enterprises that you've started and owned and run over the last 15 years or so. So I think we would put you in that class of entrepreneurs called serial entrepreneurs. So you clearly are a business builder, a team builder. You're also highly technical. You've got a technical background as well. But what drew you into the world of e-commerce, fraud, anti-fraud, click fraud, as well as payment fraud? What attracted you to this industry in particular, and what prompted you to build the Anura platform and solution?
I got my start on the internet in '93, and I was doing all kinds of stuff. That was before the web browser came out and all that kind of crazy stuff. But after about 10 years, settling on a couple things, my wife and I started a business. It was an ad network. So similar to Google, where bidded ads and stuff like that. And this is 2003 when we started it. And we started launching it and then got some clients on, things started growing. And all of a sudden I started noticing some anomalies. And I'm a data hound, love data. And I'm noticing some anomalies about the data for the visitors that are reaching our clients. And of course, if clients are not happy, they go away. So I started looking into it. I realized, okay, this is fraud. I've fought this before. I know what it is. And I don't want to be the guy solving fraud. I just want to be the guy building my network, growing a client base, and doing this stuff. So I went out. This was 2004, the 2005 era, and I started looking for a solution that I can just take bolt onto my platform that I had built and go on. And there was none. I searched high and low, talked to industry contacts. There wasn't anything around. In fact, the first commercially available fraud solution didn't come out until I think it was 2008, 2009. So as a developer, I wrote it myself, and it worked great. And I had to continue evolving it because fraud kept evolving. And while I stayed on top of it, I started having a lot of clients asking to license our technology to other channels. So we did some testing, realized we actually did something different. And before I decided to build, this would have been my third platform within that company, I went ahead and said, let's spend some money. So we spent 6 figures of our own money to test our solution against market leaders in this space. Because 2000, where are we now? 2015, there are some market leaders. So we did a year in review, and we found out that we had a more accurate, more thorough solution than everything else we tested against. So it made sense to build a new platform. And 2017, we launched Anura as a standalone licensable solution, and we've been selling it ever since.
Wow, incredible. And do you pitch your solution? This is clearly an ad fraud solution. You were building an ad fraud network, you scratched an itch, you built a solution for yourself, then you flipped the solution on its head, so to speak, and you took the AWS approach or the Amazon approach, which is, hey, let's turn this cost center into a profit center and let's spin this out and commercialize this and turn something we were using internally into an external tool that other platforms and brands could leverage. Now, with Anura, do you pitch yourself as a solution for merchants, or do you pitch yourself as a solution for other ad networks that effectively white label your technology and solution and plug it into their ad networks?
We call it an ad fraud solution because that's the biggest market for us to go after, right? However, we have clients all over the gamut. So I have gaming clients, I have survey clients, I have anybody who cares if the visitor interacting with their web asset is real or fake, even mobile apps and things like that, gaming apps. So what we really found out is what our software really is a visitor firewall. So when a visitor comes to the web asset, let's call it the web page, we can identify in real time if that person's real or fake with extreme accuracy and thoroughness. So if I can do that and tell you, the website owner, okay, I've got somebody here that's fraudulent. What do you want to do with them? So you can bounce them to somewhere else. You can not let them fill out your form. You can not let them fill out your credit card the merchant account. Whatever it is you're trying to accomplish, you can protect the rest of the chain going downstream by using our technology upfront and being proactive against it. So again, any vertical that's out there, we can protect.
And so, what would be the split today of direct merchant clients versus platform vendors that want to integrate your solution into their technology platform?
Oh, if I looked at that, it's probably 90% direct merchants.
Wow. Okay. So it's merchants actually taking your solution saying, we want to protect our web assets, our web properties from fraud. But you don't specifically pitch yourself as an anti-fraud solution for credit card fraud, but you're not trying to be a replacement for Stripe Radar or any of the other third-party fraud solutions, or at least as I read it on the Tim now. Admittedly, I've never worked with your platform before, so I'm operating from a place of ignorance here, but you don't specifically pitch yourself as an anti-credit card fraud solution, but do you help in those areas too?
Yeah, we don't pitch ourselves in that area because usually when you do it from a content marketing standpoint, most people are looking for, hey, somebody entered this credit card. Is this credit card real or fake? What we're looking at is we can complement those services. So there's a great commercial that stresses the point, and I think it was for MasterCard, if I'm not mistaken. But it was an old guy. I shouldn't say old guy; he's probably my age. But an older gentleman sitting outside of his house, in front of his laptop, holds up a credit card and says, "I'm going to purchase this dress," and he's got a young girl's voice. So he had a stolen credit card, and he was making a purchase. He's not dumb enough to sit on the IP address behind his cable modem and commit fraud because it's traceable and he can be sued, right? Especially in this country. So they hide themselves. They spoof their IP address, they spoof their device, they bounce off of different locations so that you can't trace who they are.
They use VPNs, et cetera, et cetera.
They do certain technique, and when they do that, we catch them. So I can catch him before he puts the credit card in. And I'll give you an example. I was working with a company early on in our space that they were selling 30,000 airline tickets a day through their e-commerce platform. Right? They were working with another vendor and not happy because the other vendor had a high false positive rate. We can talk about that later. But they were mismarking real people as fraud. Now you can imagine the average ticket sale is probably $1,000+ if you're buying 2 tickets at $500 a pop or whatever it is. So every transaction that this company told them don't allow, it was costing them serious money. So I remember speaking to the head of fraud of the division. They said, look, I understand you claim that your system is super accurate. You're 99.999% accurate, blah, blah, blah. He goes, but if you're a fraction of a percent wrong, like 0.1% wrong, you're going to cost me more money in 10 minutes than I spent with your company all month. And I can't have that. Let's run some tests. And it was interesting because we were catching stuff that his normal credit card vendor, like a Stripe Radar, and I don't know who he's using, so I don't want to call out names, but he was using some other vendor, traditional credit card vendor, and we were catching stuff they were missing. And their head of fraud was like, "I'm going to catch you wrong. I'm going to prove that your technology is not as good as you think." So I remember he called me up one day, and he's like, "All right, Rich, I've got one. I've got tickets that were sold here. He gave me the transaction information. We pulled it up. Yep, we definitely marked it as fraudulent. I looked at the behind the scenes data, And I'm like, there's no way this is a real transaction. He goes, oh, yeah, they flew the ticket. I said, they flew the ticket? I go, I bet you a month's worth of service, this comes back to you. You're getting charged back on this transaction. He goes, no way. I said, okay, let's make a bet. And sure enough, it was about 2.5 months later, it got charged back.
Chargeback.
He goes, I can't believe the fraudster was blatant enough to fly the ticket. You know,
It's crazy. That's mental. They didn't sell it on or something like
no.
that, or liquidate its cash, or ask for a refund or something like that, or refund to cash, or refund to air miles or something like that.
But I was looking behind the scenes data. I'm like, I knew for a fact it wasn't real, but I was still impressed. I got to say impressed, right? That the fraudster was able to blatant enough to go fly those tickets.
Wow, phenomenal! And I've got a little bit of understanding of this because I've had my own e-commerce pure play, and I've had to architect anti-fraud solutions into e-commerce solutions that I've been the architect of. So and it's interesting because oftentimes I could look when I had my own e-commerce store. I could just look at an order, and I could just there was I don't know I don't know if you've when you've been doing it long enough. After I owned my e-commerce store for 7 years, I could just work out what we had to implement because at that time there was no off-the-shelf solution. So back in the day, we implemented bin checking and we did some other things that we basically built our own heuristics model for our store and for our form fields to make sure that everything checked out. And that was good. It caught lots of things, and we would always manually review every single one that was caught or blocked. But I could just tell where I can't even think of all the ways I could tell, but usually you could just tell. And then I would look up an address. Sometimes I'd put it into Google Maps, or I don't think there was even Google Maps at that point. There wasn't. There was something else. It was some sort of online address checker, and it would, or I would just put it into Google. Full stop. It would turn out that it was being delivered. The item was being delivered to a hotel, for example, and that would be one of the red flags. There's all sorts of red flags we would look for in orders, and I guess what you're saying is we take all that stuff, that human intelligence that we would usually use when we look at an order, and all those red flags that would automatically go off in our head, and we systematize those. We're turning it into something scalable. And now I'm guessing with the advent of AI, we're now making it even more scalable and more human like heuristics in nature.
Yeah, because what's happening is, okay, so you once you start to pick up on what fraud trends look like, you can say, I got this. But if you have a busy e-commerce store, you can't look at every transaction.
Correct. Exactly. It's just not scalable.
Right. It's not. And by at that point, the credit card's already been charged. So the damage could already be done because again, if you get chargeback, too many chargebacks is not good for an e-commerce store.
And we were shipping within an hour. So the reality is, we were trying to ship same day up until 6 p.m. at night because our courier driver was coming up at 7 p.m. to collect the parcels from us. So we were trying to ship throughout the day as soon as an order got placed. And so, to your point, there's oftentimes not a big window of time between the time the order gets placed and paid for and the time the product goes out the
Yeah.
door.
So that's why we're able to systematize our product so that we can identify that stuff before they start filling out that form, before they put the credit card information in the system, without collecting any personal identifying information. We don't care about the name. That we're looking at the how they connected to your website. That's our tell. If we can see that they connected in a way that's not legitimate, we know it, we can report it, and we can act upon it before damage is done.
Now, how do you prevent? Now, let me tell you, I have been the victim of more false positives since I moved to Mexico than at any other time, literally, in my life. I'm originally from the States, lived almost 30 years in New Zealand, have a business, have a company in New Zealand, have personal bank accounts, business bank accounts, and everything else in New Zealand. Then moved to Mexico, have temporary residency here, have a local bank account here, have a Wise bank account for allowing me and a debit card associated with my Wise account that can help me get money from New Zealand to Wise to Mexico and everything else. So I got 10 different cards I can use, right? Now the challenge is that these bin numbers and all sorts of other things, when they don't match perfectly with, it's difficult because if I'm going to buy through Viva Aerobus or I'm going to buy an airline ticket through a local Mexican website, it becomes before I got my local bank card here, it became really difficult because when they ask for your address, do they want your address where you live or do they want the address for the credit card? And oftentimes, if there's a mismatch, so I'm accessing the Mexican website with a Mexican IP from a Mexican address. Then I'm putting in a New Zealand bank card with a New Zealand billing address, right? Oftentimes that will automatically they just won't do it because that's a mismatch. So then what I try to do is I try to connect to the local Mexican website with a VPN with a New Zealand based IP address, right? Then I try to put it in with the New Zealand card, New Zealand address, New Zealand IP in theory. But then they say we won't sell to anybody who's outside of Mexico. We won't sell tickets to anybody who's outside of Mexico, and we certainly won't sell it to you in NZD. So we have this mismatch between currencies, locations, website addresses, billing addresses, bin numbers. Like we've just got this web of complexity when it comes to trying to make online purchases. And for people that are digital nomads like me that spend a significant period of the year traveling all around the world, trying to do transactions all around the world, it's a flippin' nightmare.
Hmm.
And for example, when I will oftentimes get tripped up in anti-fraud. So let's say it's Mother's Day and I want to send my mother some flowers. She lives in Australia. If I access an Australian local florist website, I want to put in my mother's address. I want to order the bunch of flowers online instead of going paying horrendous fees for Interflora. I just order through a local shop just down the road from where my mom lives. I want to put in my credit card online and I want to have it sent to her. 9 times out of 10, they will block my card because I don't have an Australian IP. I don't have an Australian physical address or a physical or billing address. And so when I try to use foreign cards issued outside of Australia to make a local Australian purchase, I usually get blocked. So it's a this is so bad, and there are so many instances to lose out on a sale for people like me that this seems like the false positive challenge in some respects is harder to overcome and more threatening to a business than preventing the fraud in the first place.
Hmm. And that's a problem when. So let me just talk about a story to add to that. So we live in a society where we buy software and expect it to do its job. For example, I'm sure you use Excel in your day-to-day life, and you put a bunch of information into it, it spits out a number, and then you make business decisions based on what it spits out. But when was the last time you went back and checked to make sure Excel was doing the math right? We know that.
Nobody does.
Well, it just doesn't make sense because we just assume it does. In my industry, people buy myself or a competitor or whatever in the marketplace and just expects it works out of the box. And oh, you're all the same. So I'll just pick the cheapest one or I'll just pick whatever, fill in the blank. So, and I try to explain to people that's not the case. On average, based on client feedback, we've caught the average solution is walking around with a 15% false positive rate. Imagine what that does to your buyer's journey as an e-commerce platform. That destroys it.
You just get frustrated and you leave as a
Right.
customer. That's what I do.
Well, and I had a content writer. She was making a purchase on a women's fashion site. She's been there before, and for whatever reason, it wasn't letting her through. Now, as she's writing for us, they have some anti-fraud that's blocking me, and she tried switching browsers and whatever. And I'm like, she says, I got frustrated. I went to the competition. It was easy. I made my purchase, and guess what? From now on, I'm going to go there. And
Yeah.
that's the problem with a false positive. When you have even just a small percentage of false positives, you're actually hurting your business, not helping. So with us, and I'll explain how these other solutions work, how we work, and what makes us different. So the average fraud solution, what they're going to do is they're going to give you a score, numerical score, typically 0 to 100. They'll say, hey, once it hits 70, go ahead and block it because we're confident that that's fake. And when you read their documentation, which I have a lot of them, it says they're 70% confident that it's fraud, or it's 70% probable that it's fraud. The mathematician in me says, okay, what about the other 30%? That's probably real. Therein lies false positives. What we do is we don't do it like that. What we do is when we hit on our side 100% convinced that it's fraud, then we mark it as bad. Like we don't give a numerical score, it's good or bad. So if we say it's bad, you can take it to the bank, it's not real. And even though we have to wait till we're 100% convinced, our clients are reporting we're still finding 2 to 300% more fraud than the average competitor out in the marketplace. So not only are we more accurate, but we're actually finding more fraud. And that's what really is the crux of the system. But here's the thing. If you came in and you bounced off a VPN and you're doing all the stuff, right, to try to make that transaction, take that transaction through, and I'm not 100% convinced you're not fraudulent, and based on what you described, I wouldn't mark you as bad. Rather, a little fraud get through than block a real purchaser, a real customer.
And the thing you made a very good point, which is that these merchants are not just missing a single transaction. they're missing likely that customer will never return. So they're missing the entire CLV, the customer lifetime value of that potential customer, whatever that is for them. They're missing the entire purchase history of that customer, not just that single transaction. I think that's what merchants sometimes they miss that thing where okay, this isn't just blocking one single transaction. This is blocking that customer from likely ever doing business with you again, even if on a future purchase you would have allowed their alternate card or whatever it is to get through. They're already so pissed off, they're never coming back anyway to give you a second shot at this.
Right.
Now, the second thing is what's weird is in these cases where I've had to buy a flight for a business trip or something like that, and I'm just getting blocked by the airlines directly, what's bizarre is that 9 times out of 10, I can go to one of the flight aggregator services
Mm-hmm.
and I could put my transaction through just fine for the exact same airline, the exact same flight, whatever, and I can put it through a flight aggregator service, a broker, effectively an online broker of flights, and they'll let me straight through. So clearly, there is something going on here where if either the flight aggregators must be using better technology, better services, maybe they're using your technology, I don't know, but whatever it is, they are doing something that is more understand and what's so weird about this is that obviously with flights these oftentimes are coming from different places. People are traveling all around the world. They're buying flights once they get to a place. You would think that the airlines would have the most relaxed anti-fraud possible because of the fact that they know that there's all sorts of weird and wonderful situations how people access their flight and have to pay in their currency and have to fly from an address that's in the country to a address that's out the country, and it's not going to be a round trip flight. And there's so many scenarios in travel in particular where there's weird and wonderful situations of people needing to book travel from weird and wonderful places using weird and wonderful cards and weird and wonderful currencies, that you would think that they would be very relaxed or more relaxed than the norm about this than if I'm just a local shop and I know I'm only ever going to be selling to locals, and so therefore I can ratchet up the anti-fraud rules and the thresholds because I know that basically if anybody's buying even out of my city or out of my state, it's highly likely it's going to be fraud because whatever reason, I'm a local service provider. So it feels like certain industries are ignorant about all the ways that their customers would typically buy through them, and they really set restrictions that are just onerous for even legitimate customers to be able to get past.
Well, again, it's not, and I want to go back to it's not about being a relaxed on their fraud stance. It's about picking a solution that's accurate because they may be saying, hey, look, I have a fraud problem, right? Because in this day and age, it's no longer a question of if you have fraud, it's a question of how much fraud are you dealing with. So they're like, I need to buy a solution. So they go out in the market, they do some research, they pick a solution. And I'll give you an example. There are probably 80 to 100 solutions in the marketplace that do some type of fraud detection, right? There's only 8 of us that are certified to follow the industry standards set by the IAB, because there are third parties that will actually certify that you're following those standards. It's a third party audit process. It usually takes a couple months to go through to make sure you're following at least the minimum standards. Like these are the industry standards. You must follow at least this. But there are almost 90 of them that don't. So when you buy a solution, you do some research, you buy a solution. If you really don't know the space, you could buy a solution that's got, I've had several customers come to me with issues of over 50% false positives from one individual from the same company. Different people testing it and playing with it. It was over 50%. So could you imagine if you got stuck with that solution and now you apply, you're like, okay, I'm bought on this technology. I'm rolling the technology out. I put it on the site. And now half the real people that you're trying to sell to cannot buy from your system. What does that do to your business? It craters your business in a short period of time.
But man, does it eliminate
Yeah.
fraud?
And not only, and it doesn't always eliminate fraud, because if they're mismarking real people as fraud, they're probably mismarking fraud as real people. So what these companies do is a lot of times they are, I don't want to say overly sensitive, but they're so wrong in their technology. And they're doing it so that when you come to them and say, hey, I'll give you an example. I have an IP address. Is this real or fake? In this day and age, you're probably going to catch 5 to 10% of the actual fraud happening on just the IP address, right? Because there's known IPs that are out there used for fraud. There's data centers that shouldn't be coming from data centers. There's just known things, right? So accurately, you might be able to catch 5, maybe 10% total traffic being fraud. These companies know that's not enough to warrant the price of their product. So what they do is they ratchet up their fraud detection, so to speak. They make it super sensitive or oversensitive, or instead of being accurate, they're focusing on just quote unquote showing a higher number. Oh, Mr. Customer, I found 40% fraud on your network. You really need to use us. And that's their sales pitch. And customers fall for it. But that's why when we talk to a customer, we want them to, we don't just ask, we almost beg them to look at the data, because we know what sets us apart is our data, our accuracy. If you look at the data, for example, let a bunch of transactions come through, let us tell you which ones are fraudulent, and then you pick up the phone and have somebody on your team pick up and call them and confirm,
Yeah.
Jason, did you actually place an order for 2 airline tickets to Paris? Yes. Great. I know the company's wrong because they
Yeah.
marked it as wrong. Let's do some human verification before I stick my entire company's business future in the hands of a
In
piece
your
of
solution.
technology.
Yeah. Yeah.
Walk before you run.
Now, if I'm a merchant and I'm using a third party tool that's not yours, or for anybody, or even if it is yours for that matter, I usually am never ever going to know what the false positive rate is. Right? There's no way for me to easily figure that out unless I have a certain portion of my customer service team. That's all they're dedicated to doing, is trying to identify and go through the list of ones that have been flagged as fraudulent, and just start working my way through the list and trying to figure out some metric that I can apply to this to say what percentage of these are false positives. But how many merchants actually do that? So they just have complete blind faith in their vendor that they're not going to have a high false positive rate. But how can I validate that as a merchant? It's really hard to do.
I can tell you this, the majority of our clients do. And the reason for it, I think, is because they've had bad taste in their tongue from other vendors. So they're like, before I trust and go through what I just went through in the last couple of months with the last vendor, I need to know you're real. How can I do that? We have an actual small ebook that we've written to say how to test a fraud vendor, like some basic techniques of testing. And it's based on a lead generation, but it works for e-commerce. It works for almost anything else. But you have to at least do your due diligence in the beginning. Take a handful of transactions that get marked as bad, human verify them. It doesn't take that much time to do. And then once you've done that test and you realize, oh, wow, every single one they marked as fraud, I couldn't get the person on the phone. I got a chargeback, a month or two later. Like, we have had the issues and we know that they're right. Now you can trust the software. And then maybe once a year, retest the software just to make sure it's staying up on standards, make sure it's catching that new level of fraud that's out there. But again, nobody cares more about your business than you. So if you're going to go out there and just take software off the shelf, plug it in, and have it block a portion of your audience, you should do a little due diligence to make sure what you're doing is actually going to help, not hurt.
Yeah, yeah, it completely makes sense. And how do you guys make your money? Is it like based on the total number of transactions that you vet? Is it based on the ones that you block and vet and save? Is it like, what is your business model, your commercial model for the customer? That how do they decide what they pay you?
Yeah. So basically, we look at how many visitors per month that we be scanning, and we base it on that. I don't want to base it on how much fraud we catch, because then it incentivizes us to find more fraud, and that's
Sure,
not what you're looking
it's
for.
misaligned
Yeah, yeah,
incentives.
yeah. We every time you make a request to us, we have to do a certain amount of work. We have to bring the data in. We have to analyze the data. We have to respond with a response. We have to store the data. We have to keep cold. We put it into cold storage later on so that we have the data available for years later. And there's a cost to doing that. And we put our cost on it. We add our profit onto it, and the human support that we have, and support requests, and everybody else. And then we come up with a price. So long story short, somebody comes to us and says, okay, I'm buying $500,000 a month in Google advertising. What's my cost? It's not based on your spend. It's based on the number of visitors that we scan. It's usually a fraction of a penny per visitor. So it's really inexpensive, especially in the credit card space. A lot of those places, every time you charge a credit card, it's 25 cents just for the fraud detection. We're a
Yeah,
fraction of a penny. So it's really inexpensive. We pretty much play at the top of the funnel. Is the best place to put us, where we can capture everything coming in and then give you that insight before it causes damage. And that's pretty much how we do it. It's based on that principle. And like I said, the more volume you send our way, the bigger the discount per scan you get. I'll just give you an example. We start at 2 cents per visitor scan for really small companies, and on really big companies, it's 1 cent per thousand visitors scan. So really,
wow,
really,
wow, 1 CPM.
yeah.
Wow, that's crazy.
So again, it
Wow,
all
that's
depends on the volume. That's
of course that makes sense. And I'm guessing that even you, as amazing as your technology is, no technology is 100% perfect. So I'm guessing that you get at least a certain percentage of false positives. But when I think of the customer experience, when I think of the customer journey, regardless of whether it's genuine fraud or not, what does the customer experience feel like for me? If I go to the website, I'm detected as fraudulent. Do you redirect me to an anti-fraud page? Do you redirect me to the homepage? What do you just simply block them from even seeing the site? What or do you present them with a captcha? What is my user journey going to look like in a scenario where I'm detected as being a fraudulent visitor?
Sure. So that's dependent on the actual client of ours because our client has complete control as to what to do with that individual. So, for example, the worst thing you can do is pop up a captcha
Sure,
because a human fraud farm is going to get right past that. So human
sure,
stop fraud, right?
yep,
And we're catching probably about a third of the traffic out there is human fraud farm based. So captchas don't work. In fact, most AI bots.
we just got farms in Asia, East Asia,
Yep.
or whatever it is, and we've got thousands of people sitting in a call center or in a sweatshop,
Yep.
basically manually doing this stuff.
And then at the same token, AI bots get around that stuff anyway. So it's not like
Yes,
it's not helping you, right? So the
yes,
right thing is, okay, let's say we're at a merchant account. You come in, you put your stuff in your shopping cart. We identify you as fraudulent. You go to
yep,
make a purchase. A great transaction would be, I'm sorry, we had a problem with your purchase. Please call this number to complete your purchase. So now you
yeah,
get somebody on the phone, and then you can kind of
yes,
vet them out that way if you really want to get them on the phone. But if we've
yes.
identified that individual as bad, we are wrong less than 1 in 100,000 times based on
Wow.
client feedback. So most companies, what they'll do is when you get to that form, they won't let you fill out the form. They won't let you
Okay.
process the transaction. That's typically what happens. All of a sudden it looks like the site's not going through, or you get, oops, we have an error. Please try again later.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
they can keep a nice buyer's journey. But
Yes.
I'm telling you, like if we mark it as bad, take it to the bank. It's not somebody you want to deal with. But there's
Wow.
options because everybody wants to do something different.
Sure.
Some people want to
Sure.
say, hey, take the transaction, mark it on the background so that later I can validate it. I can manually review those transactions. And hey, I'm a human. I look at like you said, you look at transactions, you can take a look and know which fraud.
Yeah.
So if you've got 100,000 transactions a month coming through the system, and all of a sudden we flag 5,000 of them, it's a lot easier to look at 5,000 of them than it is to look at
Not 100,000.
100,000.
Yeah. Yeah, of course, of course. And I guess in some instances, maybe I'll just do auth, not capture then. Maybe I'll say, look, for the ones that you capture as fraud, I'll do the auth, but only once I've manually checked it will I trigger the capture. So that way we don't actually have to even deal with a chargeback scenario at all. We won't even take the
Yeah,
payment because issuing a refund or issuing or dealing with chargebacks, whatever, it's an expensive process for businesses to go
sure.
through. And then they have to know, okay, well, look, next month I'm going to have 100 grand worth of chargebacks coming out of my account. I know they're coming. It's a pain in the ass. So if we can split the auth and capture process based on your fraud detection, that feels like a great scenario for these merchants as well, especially if they don't trust you at first. And then they can say, look, let's split the process out and then we can handle it how we like to on the back end. But going beyond that, what types of databases are you, because presumably you have to buy access to bin lists and anti-fraud lists that are generated by ISPs and all sorts of other data sources from around the world. Presumably you have to subscribe to a lot of different data sources, or do you consider your entire data set 100% proprietary based on your network?
100% proprietary on our network. So what happens is this is how our technology works. Somebody lands on a landing page. We collect over 800 data points on the user's environment. So we're talking hardware, software, plugins, anything and everything we can grab. We know exactly how the data is supposed to look, how it interacts with each other, and based on that information, that algorithm that we've built over the last 20 years, we can give you a definitive answer, good or bad. We don't buy any of our data. We don't buy any of these things that you're talking about. We do it in a very different, unique process that works really, really well.
Wow. Incredible. And what's on your radar? Because you do pitch yourself primarily as an anti ad fraud platform, but obviously it helps across any form of fraud, any form of fraudulent behavior at all coming into a website. It's going to be blocked and dealt with. What's on your radar in terms of, is there anything your customers are asking you for today that you don't do? Or is there any gaps in the market that you're seeing that you're saying, hey, nobody's really solving for that. We're going to solve for that next. What's high on your priority list over the next 12, 18, 24 months?
Right now, our biggest concern is just growth, customer growth. And as customers come in, they ask for different things. Like one of the features we're working on now, somebody wants to know, hey, I'm buying traffic from a given source, and I want to know if something happens in real time. Like I want an alert. Tell me that, hey, this source sent me 10,000 visitors over the last 3 days, and all of a sudden it's been under 5% fraud, and it spiked over 5%. I want to know about it in real time. Or others have. I actually had one guy who It was a very unique model, but he wanted a text message every single time we identified somebody that was fraudulent on his website. And we blew up his phone. Like it was just,
Of course.
it wasn't. I said, look, we got to come up with something better than this. Like we can do it.
We got to come up with a Slack channel or something that we push all this
Yeah,
information
because
into.
all of a sudden you're just going to start ignoring it. Like we came up with something that worked out better for him. But we're working on a complete custom alert system where people can filter down their data, say, I want to know when this changes, send me an alert, send me an email alert, send me a text alert, send me something so that I know in real time what's going on. But it's customers drive the product. And that's how I've always built my companies is I get enough feedback because we're on the phone with our clients on a regular basis to say, hey, I know you like the product, everything's going great. What are we missing? It's not what Rich thinks you're missing. I'm not going to build the market. I want to know what you want because if you want it, I have several other people that are going to want that same feature. And I have people that probably need that feature, don't even know to ask for that feature. So
Yeah.
we basically, the more requests we get in for a feature, the higher up on the roadmap it goes. And then we work
Mhm.
on it. So we're working on this new feature we call filters and alerts. So you can filter your data in different ways and then build alerts right on top of it. That's the next thing for us. But really, just to give you an example of fraud, because and most people don't understand why we started off focusing on ad fraud, right? So last year, as a global society, we spent the numbers came in just over $600 billion in digital marketing. Based on our estimates and across all the data and the averages that we're seeing, and a lot of companies are around the same number that we're coming in, but close to it, we're identifying that $125 billion was lost last year to fraud.
Wow.
So
Wow.
if somebody's spending money on Google, Facebook, TikTok, native platforms like Outbrain, Taboola, affiliate marketing, email marketing, programmatic, we have a thing called Search and Social Protect. That's part of our package that we can plug in. And think of it this way: if you're buying traffic from, I'll use Bing as an example. Bing has a notorious 25% fraud
Yep.
straight out of the box.
Wow.
So, and that 25% that we identify as fraud is non-converting.
Wow. So by definition, I'm obviously paying for the click through for something that's ultimately going to be being fraudulent. So it's God, why would I want to pay for this in the first place?
Right. But of course, these big networks don't allow refunds, are very difficult to get.
Yes.
So what we
Yes.
do is we have a special process that over a period of time removes your spend from that audience of 25% that's not converting and moves it into the 75% audience that converts so that your ROI goes up with the same spend. If you have a
Wow.
way of identifying that audience and then hiding your ads from that audience, that's one of the, and that's again, when you think about a $125 billion problem growing exponentially every year, that's why we're focusing on ad fraud as our main tier. But I probably got 300 plus articles on my site right now. And there's articles that talk about e-commerce fraud. There's articles talk about visitor firewalling. This way, if somebody is actually on the internet searching for how do I protect fill in the blank, whatever it is they're looking for, we have an article that should show up. That we have a good domain authority. We should be able to. They should see that article, come to our site, read the information on the article, and then if they want some more information, we have tools and all kinds of downloadable resources. And then if they really just want to get on the phone and talk to somebody, there's a talk to an expert button on every page. They click the button, schedule a talk call, and we're talking to them.
Wow. Very fast, very efficient. And in terms of implementation and complexity of implementation, is it just a JavaScript snippet that someone loads onto their website or through Tag
Yeah,
Manager or something like
we
that?
are.
You give them a code snippet and they implement it on their website and bang, you're up and running.
We're actually, yeah, because again, you can imagine that based on what you want to do with the information can get complex in the integration, right? So we have two things. One, we're pre-built in the Google Tag Manager, so you can go to Google Tag Manager and within 3 minutes deploy us without technical resources and have all the functionality that we talked about because it's literally just a bunch of check boxes and everything else. And once you're done, hit submit. We're singing like no one hears you, or what I forget what Google Tag Manager says when it rolls it out, right?
Yeah.
Sing like nobody, like you don't care, and you're done. Or it could be you go into our system with one of our integration engineers, and we have an integration wizard that builds the code for you based on the functionality that you need. And then when you're done, you have a little tag that you deploy, and you're done.
Amazing. And if people want to get a hold of you and find out more about your technology, what you do, how you do it, I'll drop your LinkedIn link into the show notes as well as your website link into the show notes. But other than that, how do you like people to get a hold of you and have a yarn about your technology and how you work and obviously accessing this great information that you've already got on your
Yeah,
website?
I mean, if they're looking for product information and stuff like that, go to the site because, like I said, there's a lot of resource materials to learn about it before getting on the phone with somebody. And then if you want to get on the phone with somebody, it's easy to get on the phone. I mean, I'm always open, rich@anura.io. I'm easy to get. Email is my favorite form of communication because I get so bogged down. But my email list, I stay on top of my email. Typically, everybody gets a response the same day.
Wow, you're an inbox zero guy. I love it.
I've got to
I
be like
love
that.
it.
Yeah, it's never quite zero though, is it? It's always got.
I know. I try to be inbox zero myself, but man, it's really difficult. It's really difficult, and I leave sometimes emails in my inbox as a reminder. Okay, I need to look at this
Yeah,
3 days from now. I just leave it in there so it doesn't slip through the cracks, even if I got something in my calendar.
yeah.
So no, it's great. Now, listen, Rich, it's been a fantastic conversation. I've learned an absolute ton. This is a space that I am absolutely not like. I am not the expert that you are in this space. So I really appreciate the information and sharing your experience with me today and with my audience today. Now, as we come down to the end of our time together, this is where I get to flip the script. I get to hand the microphone over to you. I get to let you ask me one question, any question you like. It can be personal or professional. Mr. Rich Kahn from Anura, what is your question for me today?
What's the number one question your audiences ask you based on all the different podcasts you do? What's the commonality question that you see generally over and over again?
It's interesting. That's a very good question. I've actually never been asked that on my podcast in over 430 episodes. So it's a great question. Look, I don't necessarily think that there's anything specific that is repetitive over and over again. What I think is more common is that so we release 3 episodes a week: Monday mentorship, Wednesday B2B, Friday tech. And probably the most common question I get is, how do you find your guests? How do you find guests that are specialists in each one of these kind of 3 different areas? How do you get enough people, and how do you identify them? How do you reach out to them? How do you get them to say yes? How do you get them to carve out an hour of their time to be on your podcast, etc.? That's probably the most universal question I get, as opposed to any specific question around technology or around a process or something like that. And it's gotten my answer has evolved to that question over the years, because when I first started out, when you've only got 10 podcasts in the can or 20 podcasts in the can, you have zero credibility. Nobody trusts you. They think, oh, you're just another fly by night podcaster. Pod fade's a thing. The statistic, I think, is something like 98 or 99% of podcasts never get past episode 20. So people think it's a waste of time. Once you get to 100, 200, 300 episodes, it becomes a lot easier when you're sending that DM in LinkedIn and you're saying, hey, I'd love to get you on the pod to talk about XYZ. Looks like a lot about it. And then you send them the link to the podcast information page and they see that you're legit. You've been around for 5+ years doing this thing. It becomes easier. But when you're first starting out, it is hard, because when you slide into someone's DMs on LinkedIn or Reddit or whatever, they think you're trying to sell them something. And it's difficult to say, hey, look, let's catch up for a virtual coffee for 15 minutes to chew the fat about the industry. They definitely think you're trying to sell them
They
something.
do.
So, to be fair, most people are trying to sell you something in that scenario. And so it's definitely gotten easier, and I'm getting much more inbound. So I would say it's like 70% outbound, 30% inbound now. Whereas when I started out, it was 100% outbound. I had to do all the outreach. I had to form the relationships. I had to schedule the time, all that sort of thing. Now I've got more and more people sending me emails, or they have a podcast representative that is going out and doing outreach on their behalf to get them on podcasts. And a lot of those people, I've formed relationships with a lot of these groups and a lot of these agencies that do that on behalf of CEOs, founders, CTOs, those sorts of things. And so that has definitely made it easier for me to get a consistent pipeline of guests for the podcast.
Gotcha. Very cool. I've done, and the
So
reason why I asked that is because, and I'm glad you went that direction, because I was trying to say you probably talked to a lot of different technology. So it's not going to be technology, and I had a feeling it would be around podcasting, because last year I did 1 or 2 webinars, same thing, webinar format, with a couple companies, and it generated a lot of interest, a lot of buzz, and I'm like, wow, let's do this in house.
yeah,
What a pain
yeah.
in the butt!
Yeah.
It was a lot
Well,
of
I
work.
tell you, as somebody that does my own research, my own connection, my own recording, my own post production, and my own distribution, I can, and I do drop 3 episodes a week. I can tell you from firsthand experience, you got to commit. It is easier said than done. People say, "Oh, 2025 is the year I'm going to do my own podcast." I'm like, okay, I've seen more, even friends of mine, even agency leaders, etc. I've seen more people over the last 5, 6, 8 years come and go from the podcasting space than I would be out of fingers and toes if I counted them up. There's just so many. They get to episode 5 or 6 or 8 or 10, and they talked about all the stuff that they know how to talk about, and they don't really know how to create those relationships, those outbound requests that get positive feedback, and they don't necessarily know how to do audience research to try to match the sort of content plan they have with something that's going to resonate with their audience. Plus, for them, oftentimes, or they go the other way. They only make content that they think the audience will like or will sell to the audience, but they don't actually enjoy making that content themselves. So it's unsustainable. If you don't enjoy this, like I love this. I actually loved the conversation we had today. It was massively educational for me. It was massively entertaining. Your shit. You're clearly passionate about what you do. You're an expert in an area that I am not an expert in. And so I genuinely love this. Now, sure, maybe it helps to establish credibility for me in the industry. Maybe it creates a level of trust for me and my guests. That's all great. That's all fine. That's all good. But if I did not love the conversations I'm having, I would never, ever stick with this. And I would never have been able to do over 430 episodes of this podcast. So that's my advice to anybody who's going to get into the content game, full stop. Create content for you first that you love. Otherwise, you won't stick at it long enough to get any traction.
Very true. I appreciate it. Thanks.